It's time again for the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast with Dr. John Dentico. The mission of our podcast is to provide 21st century leadership training for a talent-driven world. We help organizations implement strategies and practices designed to attract, hire, engage, and retain top talent while mitigating the effects of burnout. Our guests are experts in various fields of organizational dynamics, including, but not limited to, leadership, management, communication, and coaching. They bring a world of knowledge and solutions to our viewers and listeners. I am sincerely grateful for their participation and ideas. So let's dive in. And if you enjoy our podcast, please like, share, and subscribe. We genuinely appreciate your support. Hello again, and welcome to the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. John Dentico. Today, I have with me Dr. Chad Prevost, an organizational consultant specializing in communication, leadership, and self-awareness. He is a certified Enneagram professionalist, a mindfulness expert, and is a Leadership Circle Profile 360 facilitator. He loves balancing these tools to form a comprehensive coaching program for people living in chronic stress, and disconnection. I am very pleased to have him here with me today. Hello, Chad. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Dentico. Nice to be with you.
I'm very happy that you could make it with me today. Looking forward to this. It should be very interesting. First, let's, as I like to say, let's jump right in. So I've done a little research on the Enneagram some years ago. It's been a while since I've looked at the information. Mm-hmm. So can you explain what the Enneagram is and how you use it in your practice?
Absolutely. The Enneagram, let's see, I'm trying to think how far back. I discovered it in the mid-90s briefly when I was in seminary, but it was just popular enough that I think there were a couple of books at the Starbucks, but I was also a little apprehensive and puzzled by the symbol. And I remember leaving it and not really working with it or understanding it very much. But really about 5 years ago, I came back to it, and we're familiar with a lot of typologies, and from the Myers-Briggs to the StrengthsFinders to the DISC, with many assessments. And many of them serve their purpose for what they are. Most, I would argue, are more behaviorally descriptive of patterns. And one of the really impressive, deep things about the efficacy of the Enneagram is that besides being a typology, it also looks at motivations behind the behaviors in a really illuminating and fairly easy to understand way, which right there already begins to distinguish it from other typologies. And so it can be used in many different facets. The application is astounding, the way it can help you understand other humans in personal relationships, from your spouse to parenting, it's getting very popular in workplace settings, and that's often where I bring trainings. And just so many different applications. It's very rich and it's very deeply psychological. And if you just want to end at the psychology, it's rich enough and fertile for you right there. But what I find is that when integrating it and really using it as a growth tool and not just as a, yippee, I'm a certain type, then you can just use it in a lifelong way. And actually lately, more and more, when I'm bringing it to organizations, like in just a few days, I'm going to be doing a training with the executive team of the Hamilton County Department of Education. And I come at it, I want people to be excited and interested in it, but I also, it's not sobering work, but it can be serious work. And I want people, and it's not just like a neato thing. I want people to realize, hey, the purpose of why you're here is to get some a little knowledge, but a knowledge that can help you actually begin to practice the things that you're learning, so it doesn't just stay in your head, but is fully incorporated into your way of being, a way that you can self-coach. And if you don't want to have a coach, the way you can use it in coaching as well. And so so we take it slowly, and in terms of, hey, this is a tool, not just a little lecture on a neat typology. So in a nutshell, I think that maybe that's a beginning point.
Yeah, I remember over 30 years ago, I used the Myers-Briggs.
Yeah.
And I felt as though it was good. It
Yeah.
gave me some insights I had not thought about. The thing that you're warned about in terms of using the Myers-Briggs, I'm sure you know about this, is to not think it's that rigid. In other words, it's a type. It's a possibility,
Yeah.
as opposed to a strictness. And I thought that was very insightful and very helpful. Is the Enneagram sort of charted along that course, if you will?
First of all, to what you're saying about the Myers-Briggs, I remember one of the very last times I took it, I ended up with an X in XX. And I was like, what are these X's? Come to find out, if you're right in the middle of the polarities that you're describing, then you come out with X. And let's see, you can go, apparently the polarities could go as much as a 1 to a 20 on either side of extroverted introversion, intuition sensing, feeling thinking, or perceiving judging. And I thought that right there was helpful, like that I was landing on N. Yep, you're really intuitive, but these others, it is contextual. That is useful, right? And by the way, there is an organization that just really does great work with the Enneagram, using it as a growth tool. The Personality Hacker. Those folk, they are innovative with the Myers-Briggs, but for the most part, it's used as this descriptive thing, which I do feel like is not as dynamic. So let's see, you're asking about how would I make some comparisons to the Enneagram that way? The theory that we use, the psychological theory of the Enneagram, is just what we know about the sum total of psychology theory that we've learned for the last 120 years and applied through that lens. And yes, I would also say there are different levels of health that one can be in as a given 1 through 9 type. And also, I think, to further add complexity to it, and something that we don't usually offer in a beginning session with the Enneagram, but it's to understand the subtypes. And it's not wings. There's a lot of misinterpretation with people who just read maybe one of the old best-selling books from 30 years ago, and they say, yes, I'm a 3-wing 4. And it's, but so you need both. A wing is a neighboring style, and you need both wings to fly. And so if you are, that description is not a subtype. It may mean that unconsciously you lean into expressions of that neighboring style, but that is not really a subtype. The subtypes are fascinating and rich. And it's, in a nutshell, it is the blending of our instincts of whether we're self-preservation, social, or sexual, one-to-one, and the blending of those instincts through one of the 9 types, so that the complexity becomes, there's really 27 of these types if you consider the subtype. And that helps account for, John, it helps account for in some ways why some people of a certain type can be quite distinctive and different in certain ways. So you go from like using an axe to a chisel in terms of fine-tuning some nuance that might explain variations between some of the subtypes. As a quick example, if I may, the most famous of the variation, the type 6, the differences between the social 6, the sexual 6, or the self-preservation 6 are really different and distinct. And there's theories as to why is it just with the 6 this way. But whatever those theories are. For instance, like I'm a 4 and I am more of a sexual 4 temperament. The sexual is more of it brings an intensity, a competition that we see expressed in animal nature. We have all 3 instincts within us, but what are we leading with? And what kind of maybe is actually gets us in trouble that we need to tame that instinct a little bit. But so as a sexual 4, the 4 is known as being the romantic, the authentic, the one that wants to be really understood, but they're famous for being more melancholic and that's more of the social 4. The sexual 4 has a little bit more of an intensity, more of an edge that can sometimes look a little 8-ish. And so it's like when people are typing, there's always a counter type. Like the counter type of the 4 is the self-preservation 4. They don't look very 4 at all because they're holding it in this self-preservation kind of expression. So it becomes fascinating with the subtypes and rich territory, and I don't think often understood as much as it could be.
Yeah, you're probably right. Just listening to you describe it, there is a level of complexity there that I think one has to be able to get through and understand,
right,
in order to really embrace, if you will, some things about themselves, some things they may not like, and move through that. Let me move on to another question, if I could.
Yes, please.
You know, I've had a number of podcast guests speak about the subject of authenticity. How do you define it, and why is it important to leader development?
Wow, that's a great question. It's a fun question because it is so rich, isn't it? It's authenticity seems to be a value that everyone automatically says, yeah, authenticity, that's a good thing. And yet it is this surprisingly elusive thing to define. And like researchers are trying to do it. Now we want to at least narrow the definition down to, we're not talking about the most authentic restaurants or what we're talking about. We're defining our terms with what does it mean to be authentic? And yet, even when we begin to value it, we begin to see it being appropriated in our culture, right? We see all this marketing of and so then you have to be suspicious about that, right? The co-opting of value that we have and just begun to be a part of capitalism's latest iteration of a marketplace thing. But authenticity, I would say, and also I think Jung really talks about this, is like, while one does have a persona, which may be, in a way, broadly speaking, what we're talking about when we're talking about types, is like there's a persona, an egoic kind of construction that we use in the world that is useful to us. But is it authentic? No, not really, because it's an archetype, it's a pattern. And Jung argues that it's not sustainable. At a certain point, we will be confronted with things that will break down and break through and challenge this persona. And a lot of people want to double down on it or stay where it's safe, and it leads to a lot of problems. But Jung's big thing was integration. And so to find that authenticity is to integrate that shadow side, but without going into the shadow thing, to stay just with authenticity. There's also, though, a recognition that we can't always be purely authentic, because there is a degree to which socially there is this expectation of showing up in culturally acceptable and appropriate ways. So in the workplace, for instance, if I come in a negative mood because maybe real things have been happening that are perfectly normal and okay for me to feel negative in, but if I'm spreading that and if I'm being negative to others, is that really working? Is that as functional? Maybe not. Probably not in a lot of circumstances. So there are limits to what we even mean by authenticity. And there is that, I think Jung called that it's a different kind of persona. It's it's like, at least if you're understanding and you're aware that, okay, I'm not totally in authenticity right now. I'm in a form of persona that I'm going to wear consciously, then that's more of a natural, expected way to not necessarily be totally in authenticity, but at least in higher awareness. But the final thing I would say to this question is this idea. One of the features that we look at in this 360, the profile that we do, is a really powerful studied or characteristic of effective leadership. One of the big ones is this bucket, this category that we call courageous authenticity. And it's right there next to integrity. And there are a lot of reasons that we could argue to not be in courageous authenticity, but really the most effective leaders are high in it, where you can have the difficult conversations, where you can speak up even if you don't necessarily know the outcome or if it's going to be welcome. Because there's a lot of behaviors we could do below the line that would be of a conservative nature in the organization, adhering to what we think others would like, perceive these complying, going along to get along behaviors, which may make us popular, liked, not have conflict. But are they necessarily leadership, as effective at least as it could be? And so that's part of courageous authenticity, is this being able to speak truth in an organization and lead in that way.
It's interesting you should bring this up. Two of my most favorite influences, personally. One is Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning, who talked about finding one's sense of purpose. And a lot of people don't realize this, I don't think so, which connects directly to the great scholar of mythology, Joseph Campbell, about the hero's journey, right? That everyone's on a heroic journey, defined by finding your bliss, by engaging with your sense of purpose. I think that's a kind of a way to put those three pieces together. So I guess there's two people right there, Campbell and certain Viktor Frankl. But another person that has influenced a great deal of my work is actually a military person by the name of John Boyd.
Okay.
And John Boyd was considered by many to be the greatest American military strategist of our time. And he is the acknowledged father of the F-15, the F-16, had his hands knee deep in the development of the A-10 Warthog, and defined the strategy during the Persian Gulf War. And he makes this statement, and I used it as a closing in my book, and that is, and I think it speaks directly to what you're saying, and that is, there will be a roll call, as he says it. And in this roll call, you'll have to make a choice as to whether you want to be somebody, go along to get along, be a member of the club, or do something where you won't be a member of the club. You will be a courageous leader. In other words, you fit into that category you described. You're willing to do what needs to be done to get the job done right. And it's so interesting to me that we're orbiting around the same planets here, in a manner of speaking, that there are these different influences in my life that connect directly to a lot of the things that you're saying. That in terms of following your purpose, I would make this statement and would ask for your reflection. In terms of living your purpose, you have to make a choice to be a courageous individual, courageous person, if you will, and do what needs to be done because it needs to be done, realizing that you are taking on a tremendous amount of personal risk at the same time. Any comeback from you would be appreciated.
To add to what you're saying, first of all, when I think of Viktor Frankl, one of the terms recently that comes to mind is simply the choice to be optimistic. I think sometimes we dismiss optimism as a personality type of the 7 or something. And people who live long lives are sometimes quite radically optimistic. And anyway, so to put him to the side for a moment, yes, with Joseph Campbell, and that I don't necessarily think that everyone does take the hero's journey. I think a lot of people come right up to that threshold and then they're like, no, I think I'm pretty good right here at home. I'm not going to take the big journey. And my understanding is those who do, in that courageous authenticity that you're saying, make the choice to leave the home and battle the dragon, which I interpret as battling the ego. And then they make their wayward way home. And then I think the daunting part of that too is just because you take the mantle of the hero's journey doesn't mean suddenly life is like all unfolding gently before you, or that there aren't consequences for taking that journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's all about what risk are you willing to accept in many respects?
Yeah.
And how smart are you in maneuvering through, following your purpose at the same time maneuvering through the quote unquote minefield that you might have to go through to get where you want to go and to do what you believe needs to be done. And to me, that is a high state of authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Living your purpose.
Yeah, because it's tied to integrity and you following through with things that you say that you value, doing it with courage, and sometimes people aren't going to like that. And so there are these consequences, even though you're doing this right thing.
Yeah. Let me move on to another question, if I could. When I speak to, I've been doing some speaking around the country and different things, and talked to a number of podcast guests. As I would like to say, folks like yourself make me a lot smarter. That's one of the benefits of doing this.
Yeah, it's fun, right?
So, yeah, it's fun and it's so informative. And so you finish a podcast episode, you go, I never thought about it like that. Maybe I should think about it like that for a few minutes or something.
Yeah, that's great. And I hope you're bringing that. I'm sure you are bringing that to your audience.
I'm hoping to make a difference, as they say. When I speak about about attracting, hiring, and retaining people, the issue of burnout is on everyone's mind. We've got people aboard, but we're burning them out because maybe we can't get as much talent or the right talent to do the job. As a coach, how do you deal with issues of burnout that come your way?
Yeah, burnout's a huge topic, and there is the collective and the individual that we are having to, but when we talk about this complex term, we can talk about the conditions for an individual experiencing burnout in the workplace. And then we're talking about, there's this whole collective thing too. But just to narrow it all the way down to the thing that you're specifically asking about, like in coaching, the approach that I take is more of a transformative coach and not a transactional coach. Is no matter what industry you're in, and it's, if you are burning out, languishing, almost burning out, or just in full-fledged burnout, there is a lot of the way that you are perceiving your approach to things that can be adjusted and shifted, but it's really hard to see by having it explained. And it has to be your choice. You have to come to it and be willing to make choices when you become more aware. And we can't solve gravity problems, right? So if you are a dentist and you're burned out on being a dentist, I can't solve the problem of the fact that you may be having to clean teeth, even though you're in burnout and you're wanting some coaching. So you can come up to eventually to a door of, is this whole profession the problem, or is it the way that I'm approaching my life and my expectations? To put it into a brief framework or a model would be this idea of, we are an observer. We have this observer in this way we see reality, and it leads to the actions that we take, and those actions lead to the results that we're getting. And so through awareness work, usually integrating the body, emotions, and the stories and language we're using that keep all these things alive, we can begin to observe our observer and then think about maybe different actions that we could be taking to get different results that we say that we're wanting. And we can experiment with that. So that's the approach that I take. Broadly speaking, we do mostly work with people in burnout and often in this midlife passage that we're touching on in this conversation when we're talking about heroes' journeys and burnout. It often happens to people in this kind of midlife where the ego's taken them as far as it really will, and then it's not maybe working as well.
Yeah, very good point. I want to reflect back for a minute on something you said. I had a podcast guest, great guy, Jimmy Burrows, and we were talking about burnout as well. And Jimmy said something that just gave me whiplash. He said, John, what happens when the organization itself is burned out? The collective, as you will.
Right.
And he said, and the signs are there: high turnover, people using employee health programs, accidents on the job. And it's something that you think, when you see most people talking about burnout, they talk about maybe coaching, and they talk about self-care, that's always a huge topic, self-care. But what happens when the organization's fried? Now what do? You're just playing your part.
That's right.
But the organization may be toxic, or the people around you in the media group, it may be in a toxic situation.
Definitely.
Which may require you to take more, as a bolder action.
So yeah, that is right. So you start with the self, right? That's what just like Socrates said, know thyself. We always start with ourselves and what are we doing? And then, if you come up to a thing, is, you know what? I have done a lot of work and I still am surrounded by people who aren't. And it is however we want to define it, toxic workplace. And I think the easiest way to think about this is to think of, if you're in a bad relationship, do you stay in the bad relationship and just do the work on you and expect everything to change? Not necessarily. There is a point where you might need to go, I need to get out of this relationship. That's what I need to do on behalf of myself.
Right. Or as Einstein would say, you can't keep doing the same things over again, expecting things to change. That is the definition of insanity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that you have to look up and down. Look at yourself, certainly, and then look around and say, is it me? Or is it... and then I got asked this question, which I thought was very interesting, and it had to do with burnout as it relates. Is it always the job? I said, no. It could be home life. It could be something going on. You got a call at 3:00 in the morning by the police department that says, come down here and pick up your drunk and disorderly child. It could be something like that, and you just feel overwhelmed at that moment as to, where do I go from here? I've tried so many different things. So burnout can occur in so many different ways and at so many different levels. So hopefully people will be smart enough, seek services like yours to help them through this. I want to ask this other question if I could.
Yeah.
In the wake of the COVID pandemic, there is an outcry for new models of leadership. I see it all the time. We need new models of leadership. Do you agree? And what would some of the characteristics, in your opinion, what would some of the characteristics be for a new model of leadership?
Yeah, I don't know that I have some model in mind, but in general, it's like we know that change doesn't usually bubble up in an organization from this grassroots level. Unfortunately, it is top down the vast majority of the time. So could our leaders please step up to here's the overall, we live, I'm going to back up a tiny bit to bring it up to this point, and that is we do live in a wonderful time. And speaking of optimism, right, we live in a time where this kind of data, what's going on in our heads and our bodies, is actually empirically studied and validated so that we know we know all the chemicals going on in our body when we do various. That's really cool. Like, it's empirically validated, all these ways to take care of ourselves, to be more aware, to be more effective. And it's the best of times and the worst of times. We could use that famous phrase because it is a time where boundaries are blurred. There's this onslaught of technical expectations. Working outside of the workplace isn't the same as it was pre and post pandemic because of all the Zooms and the meetings. So with all of and AI is just about to just flood. It's just over. It's like a huge wave of more change. So what can we do as in our humanity? Can the leaders, people in charge who have the responsibility in organizations, not go around like they're bulletproof and just thinking they're not the problem, but everyone else is, which is a common egoic response, right? I want the world to adapt to me rather than me, like realizing that my filter in reality is not the only way that reality is happening. So I don't know how we spread the word other than saying these things, bringing it to people's attention. It's human to not want to be moved until you hit a crisis or until someone makes you in some way, you burn out. Yep. So I don't know what it'll take for leader. Maybe it's an evolution and not a revolution, but I would just want to keep hammering away at the message of know yourself, and maybe your awareness and your emotional intelligence will begin to filter down throughout your organization. And you'll find that as research bears out, you'll actually also have a more effective workplace.
Yeah, the model of leadership I started developing 30 years ago, I tell people, has one baseline, one basis. Uh-huh. It's founded on one principle, and that principle is contribution.
Yeah.
We have a problem.
That's well researched. I've heard about that.
Yeah, we have a problem. Who wants to help? I don't care. I don't care where a good idea comes from. We just need good ideas. So I think a lot of that opens the process up for what you're talking about. This much more collaborative, information, knowledge giving opportunity where we can really understand how others can contribute to taking the organization or whatever down the road.
Yes.
And achieving results. And don't get me wrong. And achieving the results.
It's got to do that.
Yeah, you got to do that, but you can do it in a way that really invites people to be part of the process. So let me ask you this last question, my favorite question, and then we can close this out. And that's my magic wand question. And that is, if you had a magic wand and you could wave it at an issue or a problem, what would it be, and why have you chosen that?
That is such a tough one because I don't want to be like Dr. Pangloss in Candide and just say that we are living in the best of all possible worlds in a kind of naive way. I would say that let's just take a stab at, just pick one. It would be, I think it's related to what I just said. It would be like a revolution of understanding from the top down, people who are in positions of influence and leadership, to recognize the power and efficacy of workplace culture and leading with greater overall self-awareness, both of their thoughts, emotions, and what's going on in their bodies for the health of everybody.
Yeah, it's certainly a great place to start.
Yeah.
Great place to start. Listen, Chad, thank you so very much for being on the podcast. I truly appreciate it. You've done a great job. I really resonated with many of the things that you said. And again, it'll have me wandering around, looking at the ceiling and thinking more about things that I hadn't thought about. maybe for a while. So I wish you all the best in the future and all the success. And again, thank you so much for being here on the Throttle Up Leadership Podcast.
Well, fantastic. Thank you so much for this opportunity to share these thoughts and ideas in a conversational way with your audience. And thank you for the really good work that you're doing out there in the world.
I appreciate it very much. You have a wonderful day.